we are missionaries of the future semi-utopian world of blockchain and Web3.
How do we simplify as founders in general by communicating value of what we do really quickly?
What I find the most useful is to try to almost transition myself into the customer's persona and see the world from their perspective.
What to you is intrinsic motivation?
This is a billion-dollar question, isn't it?
Welcome, listeners. I'm Seb Wichmann, your host of the DoGood Insider, where we dive deep into raw and meaningful conversations with visionary founders and CEOs who see beyond profits, elevating the lives of employees and vendors and the planet we call home. As today's guest, I'm super excited to have Boris Pikalov, a leader in blockchain, tokenization, and decentralized finance. As the co-founder of Stobox, Boris has spent over 5 years leading business strategy, operations, and analytics, leading the mass adoption of tokenization and fostering inclusive financial ecosystems. In his role, he led over 70 asset tokenization projects involving over $1 billion worth of assets. He has been a featured speaker at events like the Blockchain Real Estate Summit and a thought leader in publications like Bell Crypto, where his expertise in real-world asset tokenization has shaped industry conversations all around. So get ready to dive deep into the future of blockchain technology with one of the brightest minds in the space that I at least know. So welcome, Boris. So Boris, when we first talked, I remember vividly the way you expressed yourself, that it is so tough sometimes, and I can relate for sure, to run this balance between being customer-centric and solving things in the moment when stuff just hits the roads versus, looking after our staff in regards to well-being and making sure we're in it for the long time, for the long haul, so to speak. Talk us through, how do you navigate this balance within Stobox?
Okay, that's a great question, and I love that we are diving right in. So first of all, let me highlight with the specific types of problems when this balancing act emerges. I can think of two primary situations. One is a situation where clients are challenging, they're hard to work with, or they're highly demanding, and therefore teams, even if they don't need to stay after hours or do more work than usual, they are still more emotionally exhausted when working with these kind of clients. So this is one type of issues where, and they would rather prefer not to work with these kinds of clients. So this is one issue where we face this trade-off. Another situation where we face this trade-off is when stuff just happens and has to be solved urgently, even if it happens after hours, and even if sometimes you have many projects coming at the same time, you sometimes need to stay after hours for multiple days in a row, for example, for an entire week. So this is a second type of situation where this trade-off happens. And thirdly, in general, we are trying to foster a high-performance culture. And high-performance culture sometimes means that not even in terms of number of hours, but in terms of how you spend these hours, the work is more intense. There is more overall cognitive load. You have more project, therefore your project's context switching has to happen more frequently, which therefore generally leads to the feeling of higher fatigue. So this is how this trade-off emerges. Now, in terms of what do we do with solving it to the extent possible? One, we hire a talent, or we at least try to hire a talent that allows the high-paced, high-performance environment, because it is challenging to transform individuals. It is possible, especially if someone is early in their careers, to unlock the strength they didn't know they had. But I would say this is rather an exception than the rule. And typically people are generally set in their ways in terms of which kind of environment they prefer. And therefore we are trying to locate find the people who would thrive in this kind of environment, people who care, people who love intensity, people who love to be continuously engaged, and therefore who would actually benefit from being part of this team. And we can speak about hiring practices later. So this is one. second is we provide our team members agency to decide how and when if they prioritize their well-being versus customer centricity. So this was, at some point, it's not an easy choice because sometimes you can disagree with where they place priorities, obviously, and it can be challenging to want to provide this respect. And secondly, it can be challenging to shift from a culture when you use target and specific bureaucratized rules in order to manage this to a culture of trust. But this is what you need in order to achieve high performance, because high performance happens, and high performance that is sustainable and protected from burnout happens when people are operating based on intrinsic motivation. And intrinsic motivation, this is a well-researched topic, has three requirements: autonomy, competence, and the relatedness. There's three needs that have to be satisfied in a work environment for intrinsic motivation to emerge. And therefore, we need to respect individual autonomy in order to protect their intrinsic motivation, for them to feel that when they decide to engage with this current client, they do this based on their internal choice. They kind of accept this challenge as their own. So this is probably the key aspect. Thirdly is, I would say, having conversation and fostering a culture of customer centricity in terms of leading by example. So the way I personally do it is by myself jumping into difficult cases and the ones which are especially difficult, and supporting the team myself. First of all, to model what kind of how does the customer centricity look like? What kind of replies do you do? Where do you set the boundaries? Where do you budge? And generally, what kind of vibe do you have in conversation with your customers? And I see this kind of work. The city members saying to me, I try to emulate the Zen-like calmness that you exhibit when speaking with angry clients. And they try to do so. So this modeling works in terms of setting a standard to which team members want to reach. So I'd say this is the third aspect that helps us navigate this balance and create another intrinsic drive to achieve high performance.
Wow, I think you have really missed your profession, certainly well prepared. You could have been like a training and development expert like myself, hearing you talk. That is
maybe in
amazing.
Some other life.
Maybe in some other life. That is, and I would love to, dive deeper into kind of like you speak about, intrinsic motivation, which is such a interesting piece around how do we get the most out of people. We dive into this in a second, but talk us through Stobox, talk us through tokenization, talk us through decentralized finance, the way I understand it, and you help hopefully us to understand this better, in particular audience that is not familiar with blockchain per se, but it's about real assets like real estate, for example, and using blockchain to prove ownership. Would that be fair to say?
This is one of the examples. So let's start. I believe there will be two useful mental models to have in order to understand tokenization. The first mental model is imagine a cryptocurrency. You're probably familiar with cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin or Ethereum or any others, as well as most viewers. So imagine that the cryptocurrency you hold provides you an income from a piece of property every quarter. Or let's say that the cryptocurrency you hold is actually a share of Tesla, or is at least backed by a share of Tesla. And you get, or a share of SpaceX. It might be a share of an unlisted company as well. Or let's say that you have funded a glass manufacturing facility in Ghana, which is one of the deals we are currently working on. And in exchange for your funding, you have received this token, which entitles you to receive the proceeds from the sale of this glass to a private equity buyer, of this plant to a private equity buyer after the business conducts an exit. And you can either hold this token yourself and receive this exit proceeds, or you can resell this token to someone either privately or on the market and receive your money from the sale right now. So basically what we do is issue cryptocurrencies backed by real world assets and the real world cash flow. The two biggest asset classes are real estate, as you mentioned initially, and the commodities such as gold, such as oil, such as timber, and such as gemstone and similar. So this is one mental model to understand tokenization. Now, second mental model, which is useful to understand why tokenization is valuable, is to think of an internet and of the systems of record. Currently, if you own a share in a private company which is not listed in a stock exchange, then the record that you own this company is maintained either by the government business register or by the company themselves. So, and a different company would have a different register of their shareholders. Therefore, for example, if you want to, let's say, swap one share for another, you have these two separate registers that have to be updated, plus a register of a certain space in which the transaction happens, plus if the transaction happens via bank transfer, you also have two banks which need to update their registers. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different registers, 5 different databases that need to be updated in order to conduct these transfers. And these databases need to synchronize and provide access to each other in order to confirm that transaction has happened, or need to have certain individuals that look into them and make a decision that the transaction has happened. And this is not easier if we speak, for example, about interaction of your security with a bank. When you want to, for example, you have a share in your company or in some other company, in Tesla, and you want to take a loan against this share as a collateral. Again, there is, on one hand, there is one place where you have a record about your ownership of this share, and then a different record which signifies how much do you owe to the bank and how this share is stored, and the third register which signifies that you actually received this money, how do you spend this money. What this leads is that these kinds of financing transactions are complex. What happens in blockchain is that you have a single register, a single ledger where all of these records are stored. For example, if the transaction happens on Ethereum blockchain, you have one token, share of company 1 on the Ethereum blockchain, share of company 2 on the Ethereum blockchain, and you use the same currency, let's say tokenized dollar USDT, which is also on the same blockchain. And therefore, when everything happens on one chain, it's much easier to conduct this transaction because these registers and these assets can talk to each other directly. And different applications, for example, a financing like loan application or a trading application also exists on this blockchain or on other blockchain that is connected to this one and can talk to it. For example, Polygon or Solana, etc. And what happens is that when you bring your asset on chain and it becomes tokenized, it now can talk. Besides being programmable itself, it can now talk to all these other assets and all these other applications without the need to request access directly, without the need for a bank employee to review them and give you this access and approve the interaction. Instead, it can happen via automatic cryptographic tools. And therefore, everything that comes onto blockchain becomes part of the interoperable financial internet. And this leads to the possibility of easier investment, like it's easier for myself to buy this asset, to invest in this glass manufacturing plant or real estate facility or whatever. It becomes easier to trade this asset because they can now interact with different kinds of trading protocols. It's easy to me to monetize it in some other ways, like, for example, input it, again, use it as a collateral against a blockchain loan or any other CEO application.
Wow. So now you are training and development expert and a genius. That sounds incredible. Wow. So, like, it's really interesting.
This is not my idea. I'm just actually making this happen.
It sounds super complex. We kind of we grew up with paper exchanging value as in dollar notes. And suddenly there is this, what sounds to be a mega complex topic that's sitting here right now is really hard to fathom because it's intangible, right? Unless you really understand the intricate detail of how the technology works, it's like, wow, it sounds very difficult or it sounds very complex, but it all boils down to the fundamental law of ledgers and blockchain and certifications, I guess, and having proof points who owns what to some degree. I'm not sure if I summarized that correctly, but that is awesome.
I would say yes, this is a correct summary. And I like how you quickly grasp the essence of what is different. And you are right that one of the primary challenges we're facing is complexity, both internally in terms of new team members getting up to speed with everything that is happening. On the other hand, with our customers. And with our customer, there is a twofold challenge. On one hand, extracting this complexity away so that they don't have to think about ledgers and settlement and whatever, because otherwise we would have very few customers. So that's one. And second, customers getting used to tokens and to the kind of thing they can do with them, like creating not just suggestions, the learning curve for getting more and more proficient with cryptocurrency, really creating this experience of mastery when interacting with digital assets. And this is both true about the investors who will be interacting with this asset, but also the issuers who are creating the assets, who are also come to us and say, I want to raise funding via tokenization. I have heard this is cool stuff, but I have no idea what it is, how to work with it. And you also want to not just tell, okay, do X, Y, Z, but you want to create a collaborative process within which the customer grow themselves and therefore can make more informed decision about their issue. Because at the end of the day, no one knows their business better than themselves.
Yeah. Wow. I'm going to go off topic a little bit here, to be honest, because it is so interesting sitting here on the receiving end, if you allow, and listening to the topics, the technical knowledge and language you're using that is so foreign to me and possibly also to other founders, unless you are in the blockchain kind of space, if you will. All of that sounds kind of a little complex, right? Let's be honest. Talk me through what's in my head right now is this. You as a founder, us as founders or as CEOs, our responsibility, and I would love to have a wider conversation, if that's okay, away from blockchain and more into our responsibilities to clearly and simply articulate and communicate the value proposition of our services, of our products. So somebody that is not yet aware about that they have a problem and is not yet aware about the industry, that they understand the value of what we offer. Like in your specific case, do you usually see people kind of quickly understanding what you're talking about? Do you find that you had to also come up with analogies or stories or depictions of explaining in simple, maybe even visual terms of how it works and the value behind it? Or are you only talking to investors and clients and know the industry already? Talk us through kind of, I guess, how do we simplify as founders in general by communicating value of what we do really quickly?
So there are different levels at which this is applied. So one is general observation. Founders, especially tech founders, are often people who are tech nerds, who love the technology, who understand the technology, who often have technical background. And this fascination with technology often comes to handicap us when we come to speak to customers or create the customer copy, because things we care about when we think about technology and the underlying benefits are sometimes different than the ones customers care about.
Yeah,
so
I hear that.
To have different hats. On one hand, you have a hat of a builder who makes things happen and who understands all the intricate details, and the hat of a seller who communicates it in a way that is useful to customers. And when I in my marketer and seller hat, what I find the most useful is to try to almost transition myself into the customer's persona and see the world from their perspective. Like, I'm coming into this website or I'm speaking to this person and here is what I want to get. Here is my background. What kind of language would I find clear and compelling? And in my practice, what I typically do is now I rarely do this, but when we started, obviously I was even writing marketing copy and whatever, because we have limited resources, as we all do. And when I'm writing marketing copy, I'm typically looking at the two things I want to communicate. One, say in simple words, what is the actual value that people get? For example, one of our first marketing copies has been raise capital by issuing a cryptocurrency or crypto token, something in that range. So this one is similar. A, raise capital, and B, use the cryptocurrencies for this, because we're looking for people who have at least some degree of familiarity. So this was a relatively clear value proposition. And we have had different experiments. For example, we have been experimenting with copy that emphasizes how this is different from anything else. We were using something like conduct IPO 10 times cheaper because the using tokenization as a way for federation is similar to IPO, but significantly faster and cheaper. So we're using this kind of copy. So one way in which you do this is to communicate clear benefit in the language of your customer. And notice what I also did in the last one. I used the term IPO as something they're already familiar with in order to exhibit the existing concept and then build on top of it.
Yeah.
And it's relatively standard stuff like Uber for X. So this also definitely helps. Second thing, which is useful, but which one probably shouldn't overdo, is to try to communicate your why and what you are about with your language. So, for example, when you, as a company from a customer perspective, are you caring and are you wrapping them in a blanket and using this blanket as a safe space to get them in the tokenization space? So is this how you position yourself? Or are you kind of want to position yourself as aggressive salesman who will get the money on their behalf, no bullshit, and you're a fast talking and you're let's get this done. So this is a different copy that you would use in your marketing. So this is another thing that you communicate partially by specifically naming your values, partially by just the choice of words and even the tempo of your copy when it is being read. So part of that is, so this is the second thing you want to communicate. So this is in terms of the copy. Then there is a topic of communicating with clients when they come to you and you participate in sales conversations and in consulting conversations and you prepare them to the issues. On this front, you have more time to communicate complexity, but you still want to distinguish between relevant and irrelevant complexity. So typically, technical details of the issues are an irrelevant complexity. What is irrelevant complexity is legal and financial complexity of the asset they are trying to issue. Because if they issue a fixed income asset or a variable income asset, this is something that is highly important for our client to understand because this will impact their liability and their business model. And therefore, or when, for example, they cannot raise more than certain amount from this jurisdiction, they need to be aware of that because they would be controlling this on their side when they are conducting the issues, at least until we automate it. So this is the kind of complexity we communicate, we kind of selectively decide which has to be communicated. And thirdly, you mentioned the topic of visual metaphors and analogies. We rarely use them, but there are a few cases when we do. One particular when we explain what is a decentralized exchange or automated market making protocol, because the analogy I use is an analogy of two jars. Because what a liquidity pool is you can imagine this as two jars. One jar is your security tokens. Another jar is certain cryptocurrencies like USDT, a stable coin. Stable coin is a crypto token which is backed 1-to-1 to $1. So it's like a crypto dollar. And you can imagine these two jars. And when someone wants to trade, they can either take tokens from one jar and put stable coins, crypto dollars in a second jar, or they can take crypto dollars from a jar and put your security tokens into a second jar. And in this way, they either buy or sell from the pool. And depending on how the ratio of this asset changes, the price gets adjusted. So if you have 100,000 tokens, $100,000, the price is 1-to-1. Then you take away 10,000 tokens and put in $10,000 if you bought a $10,000 chunk and the price rises to 122 because of the change in the ratio. So this is the metaphor that I found useful for myself. First time I learned about it. And we're using this in our client communication as well, instead of speaking about bonding curves and mathematical stuff as to how this is calculated. So when you need clients to understand something technical, this is when metaphors help.
You know what I find amazing as I get to know you, Boris, is that you have clearly learned to wear so many hats, right? Like, I mean, it's incredible. You're obviously an expert in tokenization and blockchain, but then you had to also learn how to intrinsically motivate people and how to bring on the right team, right? Which is a totally different skill set, right? And then the marketing angle in terms of communication. Let's dive a little bit into kind of, I guess into my strong suit, which is kind of emotional intelligence, leadership. Intrinsic motivation is a word that you just used just a couple of minutes ago when we introduced you. Talk us through getting the most out of people, right? Motivating them. getting them to work long hours, but also supporting them in moments when they are burnt out, to finding this balance we talked about. What to you is intrinsic motivation? How do you figure it out? What is somebody motivated by? And how do you get kind of them to perform the best? Talk us through that a little bit.
This is a billion-dollar question, isn't it? Well, one point I will briefly answer your previous point on wearing many hats. So this is one of the things I like the most about being the founder, that I get to learn a lot about different topics, and there is high degree of variety and growth in each area I have to touch. So I have high growth motivation and learning motivation, and this is kind of what I get from being a founder. Now, getting back to your main question, which is about creating intrinsic motivation. So firstly, obviously, there isn't a silver bullet or a single thing that creates intrinsically motivated team. This is about a broad set of measures within the company, and we can think about intrinsic motivation from two angles. One angle I mentioned previously is satisfaction of intrinsic needs that lead to the emergence of intrinsic motivation. Secondly, you want to avoid crowding out intrinsic motivation by an extrinsic one, because there's also well-documented effect called crowding out, which is when you rely too much on extrinsic motivation, then intrinsic motivation goes down. For example, if you primarily use KPIs and monetary rewards in order to motivate people to achieve certain goals, then people focus on that to a larger extent than on their intrinsic motivators. So these are the two things we are trying to balance. I'll start with the second one, with avoiding crowding out. What is needed to achieve that? One is the feeling of fairness. That is, typically people lose intrinsic motivation when they feel that the environment is unfair, or they aren't being valued, they aren't being properly compensated, or their incentive structure isn't aligned with what is a good work for them. So what we are trying to do correspondingly is to continuously speak to people as to what their needs are and how do they feel themselves. And secondly, when we discuss their incentive structures, and with most people we do have incentive structures, we discuss what kind of incentive structure would lead to the best alignment between their feeling of fairness and what we want to get from them. For example, with one of our technical experts who is working on custom development for clients, which we rarely do, the incentive is that he gets the bonuses only after the client is successfully released in the beta environment, and only if the client has certain level of satisfaction. And this is something we collectively agreed on. And the requirement that the bonus is paid only after client successful release, rather than for every month of successful work, has been my requirement that the employee has agreed with. Why? Why do they want this requirement? Because my business goal isn't so that clients work indefinitely, but the clients actually get released clients get released and get successful. So I wanted the bonus to be tied to an achievable outcome, rather than just indefinite amount of work on one hand. On the other hand, when it comes to satisfaction, my initial view was given just some kind of generic satisfaction questionnaire, while the team member wanted to have it much more specific so that he gets to control the actual satisfaction triggers. And we agreed to offer this more specific satisfaction questionnaire so that he gets satisfied. So we had a negotiation process so that the guy would feel we have a fair environment. And note that this metric can still be gained. So you can, because the bonus, even if it's paid at the end, it is still paid for each month of work on this client. And therefore, there is still an internal incentive to work longer and delay the client delivery. But I trust the team member that they won't go with this perverse incentive, especially since we are continuously in the interaction, and I would notice if the work is being delayed. So part of the extrinsic motivation of avoiding crowding out isn't just to have align the incentive structure, but also to not overdo it and not get it too invasive into someone's work. So this is one thing. Basically, what you want is so that the incentive isn't salient, it isn't dominating someone's day-to-day thoughts about work. Then the second part about intrinsic motivation. On the intrinsic motivation part, as I mentioned previously, there is a useful framework of autonomy, competence, and relatedness. On the autonomy, this is achieved by offering individuals broad autonomy about the content of their work and broad autonomy about the selection of goals, which is negotiated with yourself. And one of the ways in which you achieve this autonomy is by being very clear regarding your vision and strategy. If your vision and strategy isn't clear, but you offer high autonomy, then the risk you run into is that this autonomy would lead company in the direction that is misaligned with other team members. Therefore, if you're clear on what are your current goals, what you want to achieve, then it's much easier for individuals to come up with goals that are aligned with the strategy and still get them negotiated with you according to your suggestion. So this is one aspect of autonomy. On the micromanagement, this one is actually not as obvious as it seems. Why? Because in some cases, you just have to dive into someone's work because objectively they either don't have enough context or they did something that is of objectively insufficient quality. And part of your job as a founder is to consistently increase the excellence bar. If you want to win in any market, but especially in this market, you need to have an excellent work and you need to raise this excellence bar. But you have different ways to intervene in someone's work and raise the excellence bar. You can do this by saying, in a very blunt way, you will want to say, this is really, really bad. I dislike it. Please remake everything. This is obviously something that leads to a decrease in intrinsic motivation and decrease in the feeling of competence. Or you can say, you can be more specific in terms of what specifically do you believe needs to change in order to achieve higher excellence bar? That is to provide a clear pathway toward improvement, and therefore you create a feeling of at least potential for mastery by creating this clear pathway to excellence. This is one. Secondly, you frame it from the perspective of accountability for the team and common goal. Like you don't say, you remind them about their own capability and their growth. Like this isn't your best work. I know for example, from this project or that project that this can be significantly better. And I would like you to achieve that level of quality that you have achieved in these other instances of work that I have had with you. Because as we discussed with you previously, if we don't get that, we don't get to win. And in as far as you care about the team winning, which I know you do, then you probably care about this work being up to par and up to the standard. This kind of language helps people to maintain the sense of autonomy and competence, even if you dive into their work and even if you criticize their work. And another important rule here is to not sugarcoat and not try to play games like play games when you are not direct about the fact that you dislike something. Because a trap that I have fallen into in my early years is that I was really afraid to criticize people so that to avoid demotivating them, and I wasn't sufficiently clear that I dislike something. And I have found this to be unproductive because I myself feel that I cannot express myself and people don't know where they really stand. And therefore, it's better for me to be direct and treat others as adults, because when you treat people as adults, they tend to behave as adults. So this is the second rule. Then there is the topic of relatedness. On the relatedness, there are two types of relatedness that matter. One, relatedness in a sense of feeling that we are a team, here in internal team cohesion. And secondly, there is relatedness in terms of feeling that you have some kind of higher purpose that we are working for, and higher purpose that makes you feel related to the industry in general and kind of the humanity to which we are contributing. And on the kind of internal team relatedness, this turned out to be surprisingly easy. Like we hire people who kind of get along and tend to bond into strong teams. So we never really felt strong problems with internal team relatedness. And therefore I have limited insight to provide here, but probably the rules are that you want to not create incentives or other things that pit people against each other. You want to have team where all people are high performance, and therefore they get to respect each other and enjoy to work with each other. And this tends to lead to high degree of cohesion. And we have found that we don't really need some kind of team building exercises or other work in order for people to get to respect each other and feel like part of the team. So this is one. Second part of feeling part of a broader movement has been more complex. Why? Because as you have seen, the industry is complex, and sometimes explaining the benefits we explain can get quite abstract. For example, the way I think about the benefits we are creating is accelerating economic growth by increasing the efficiency of capital allocation, by creating efficient capital markets for illiquid and private assets. So this doesn't sound really motivating for most individuals. And therefore, this is, if you use this kind of language, even though I find this to be more accurate in order to describe what value we create for the world, it's hard to convert this into a mission, especially for people who do not come into the team as economists. So what I try to do instead is to say, and what we have found to be effective, is to speak about transformation. Say that the world is coming from the Web 2 world into Web 3 world, the world which is more transparent, more decentralized, more digital, more effective, which is just better. There is a grand broad transformation that is happening, and we are part of making this transformation happen. We are missionaries of the future semi-utopian world of blockchain and Web 3. And this kind of language, a simpler vision of transition and progress, is something that we find people do find motivating. They do like being part of this movement towards the future of tokenized finance. And this is the way you make them feel related in terms of being part of a bigger picture and bigger purpose. So
Amazing.
Motivation is a hard puzzle with many moving pieces.
Yeah, thank you so much, Boris. That is incredible. Like, I mean, we could just have, I think, for days and weeks, continued conversations, probably about a million of other topics that we all realize you're probably a genius at. So amazing. Thank you so much for the insights. I mean, what I grabbed just as one little token, which, is certainly something that I deal with in my business on a day-to-day basis. And I would assume also many other CEOs and founders, which is the point around having adult conversations, which you just raised, right? Mm-hmm. To actually not sugarcoat. And we don't have to be outright, kind of coming through with a sledgehammer, but it's really about, in my point of view, and you tell me as well, but having a honest, direct conversation and expressing one's own dissatisfaction and frustration in a way that is communicates clearly, right? Where the other part just understands what the problem is and gets to hear the context of why that is a problem. And hopefully in collaboration, we can solve this as a team, right? So that is something I will take away. Boris, thank you so much for this amazing masterclass, I would call it almost. Really appreciate you. You're clearly up to amazing things. Love your smile. Love you. Just you're clearly passionate about entrepreneurship, right? So I really appreciate that. I'm sure that all our fellow CEOs and founders appreciate that. In short, thank you so much. You were an absolute treat to have you. And thank you.
Thank you too. This was a fascinating conversation. I loved your questions, your deep dive questions about the topic that aren't too commonly asked on podcasts. And it's good to have someone to discuss this with.
Amazing. Boris, thank you so much.
Thank you too.